I bought this new liquid cooler from MSI, this MAG Coreliquid 360R with Mystic Light. Here you can see the box opened. I was pretty excited to put it in my case and see what it would do to my thermals. Quick install guide, has the cooler, 3 fans, and a whole bunch of mounting brackets. And here you see my old case. My old case has some simple fans in the front and a push-pull configuration on an old Corsair, I think C60. Here's a picture of the new cooler by MSI out of the box. It has a copper block and a big 3x120mm radiator. And you can see the square in the middle. That square is the actual pump. This is a different configuration from most of them, where they have the pump in the actual processor block. And here's the processor block. As you might notice, there is no pump connector. There's only the little connector for the lights. And there's the end that plugs into the motherboard of the light connector. Here's the bag of goodies that you get. You can connect it to pretty much any kind of Intel processor, or AMDs, which there's really only one connector for those and it's a lot easier. Happily I have an AND. Just one more quick shot of the radiator and we're ready to go. The first thing I need to tackle is taking all these fans out of the front, so I went about doing that. Unfortunately, I'll have to get rid of this old 4TB hard drive. I wasn't really using it anyway. It was more or less just a mirror of one of my other drives, and I was not actively backing up to it or anything. I might put it in a backup drive enclosure. It's pretty old. It's one of the WD Red NAS drives, and it had failed, I think, once on me. Here you can see where one of my fans just barely reached the multi-fan connector that comes inside this old NZXT case my friend gave me, and it has bent the top right fan connector. I just bent that back into shape. Get some tools ready and let's get this job done. The fans come individually wrapped and are MSI branded. All 3 of them have RGB on them. And here you can see the parts that come in the goodie bag all splayed out. You get a Molex to fan connector and 3 fan connectors that are extenders. You also get the mounting hardware for all the different parts of all the different kinds of processors and a tiny bit of thermal grease. So this was the orientation I chose to use. In the manual they tell you to use a pull configuration, but I wanted to do a push configuration from the front of the case. That way you would also get to see the fans from the front of the case. There's just a side view of the room that you have inside this old NZXT case. And here's the old Corsair C60. I think that's the model. I forget what it is by now, because it's like 10 years old. And we'll see about it later. The thermals were pretty good. It would max out around 75 degrees Celsius under heavy load. The thermal grease doesn't look very even here, but when you look at the processor, you'll see that it's spread pretty evenly. Might be hard to see in this shot, but yeah, there's a bit of thermal paste all over the processor, so the old application was good, but we'll have to do it again for the new one. A little alcohol will clean it all up. I missed this last night, I guess, when I was working on it, but there's a little bit of thermal grease on some SMD capacitors there. That won't hurt them. So I took the old fans from the front of the case and I put them into the top of the case. That way I have a push in and a pull out of the same velocity of air, basically. It took a lot of wrangling to get them in there. What I did was I used regular fan screws at 2 of the corners of each of the front fans, and then I put the radiator up against it and then used the very long bolts to go through the fan to the radiator. That way I didn't have to fuss with it as much and try and hold everything in place while trying to use the long bolts for everything. From the side you can see I've done a little bit of cable management already. This could be better, but it works for now, and it has cleared away all of the cords from any of the area where the air should flow. There's a giant space where all the drives used to be. Unfortunately you cannot fit any drives in there anymore because the radiator uses that space. Time for a power-up test. Hey, wait a minute. What's going on with that bottom fan? It doesn't look like it's spinning. I think you can see the issue in the shot. but I quickly got it working. Basically, one of the fan connectors had disconnected while I was carrying it over. It looks pretty sweet without any of the elements of the case on, but the next thing we have to do is add the filter on. As you can see, this case came with a pretty simple filter. It's a very coarse weave. It doesn't seem to let very much dust in though. It usually catches all the pet hair that we have in our apartment. And here you can see it with the front plate replaced. I should clean that up a bit, but it looks pretty good from the side. You can see the lights from the RGB fans. Inside the case you can see the RGB elements of the processor block, as well as the red fan that was in the case, top of the case previously put into the back. So that's 3 fans coming in the front, 3 going out the top, and 1 slightly larger fan going out the back. You would think that would create an imbalance, but there's a bit of a fix for that. Yep, that looks super janky, doesn't it? So what I did with this old NZXT case, it used to have a acrylic plastic side. I cut a giant hole in it for a 180mm fan, and you may have also noticed that the internals of the case were pretty dusty. Well, there was no filtering on it for a long time. So what I did a few days ago was I used a piece of bedsheet and a whole bunch of like popsicle sticks to make a really janky sort of mesh filter for the side of the case. With the 180mm fan pulling in, it should provide an equalization of pressure. Just a little shot of the red fan going out the back. There's lights everywhere on this thing. And another shot of the finally assembled case. It's a pretty good looking case, even though it's a bit dusty and I need to clean it up. It has some stickers that I've accumulated over the years. And surprisingly, very surprisingly, it looks kind of good through the bedsheet. You can see the illuminated bedsheet there in this shot. Here's another view of the right side of the front. That is one of 2 intakes that the front has. And here's the bottom of the front of the case. You can see the RGB fans casting a sort of rainbow light on my awful 70s floors. Now on to the conclusion. As it stands, the old push-pull configuration for my old Corsair C60 was around 75 degrees, maybe getting up to 80, but not really. It usually hovered around 60 to 70 when I used a full 16 cores. Not great news with the new thermals. They're not that much better, but you get a few degrees of difference. And it's more consistent, way more consistent, especially on the low end. When idling, my idle temperatures are much lower, like in 35 basically, whereas usually they'd be like, 40 to 45, sometimes 50.